Hello, I'm Mariam Mashiri. This is the Iran War Today, our daily briefing bringing you up to date with all you need to know on day 55 of the US-Israel war with Iran. Well, let's start now with some of today's key developments. In a phone call with the BBC, Donald Trump says his strategy in Iran is working very well. We'll bring you the top lines of what else he told us. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps releases footage of armed troops boarding cargo ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, the US releases footage of American forces boarding a sanctioned ship transporting oil from Iran in the Indian Ocean. And the Lebanese Prime Minister accuses Israel of war crimes a day after Amal Khalil, a Lebanese newspaper journalist, was killed in an Israeli attack. Well, in a phone call with the BBC's North America editor today, Donald Trump says Iran is dying to make a deal, and he believes his current strategy is working. His comments come amid an indefinite ceasefire between the US and Iran after face-to-face talks fell apart in Islamabad just under 2 weeks ago. Well, let's speak to our North America editor, Sarah Smith, who's fresh off the phone with the president. And Sarah, what's your assessment of what the president said in terms of Iran and his criticism of America's NATO partners?
Well, so he's been very optimistic about the position on Iran, possibly more than the evidence would necessarily allow for. He often is quite bombastic when he's describing the American position on the war. And what he said to me was that Iran was dying to make a deal, and that whatever he was saying, whatever he was doing was obviously working well because, as he said, Iran was so keen to make a deal. Now, that may or may not be the case. I think it's deliberate that Donald Trump, when he's speaking to journalists, puts as positive a spin as he possibly can on the situation with Iran. He does the same when he's posting on social media as well, insisting that he's already won the war and that he will get exactly what he wants in a deal with Iran. We will wait and see if his optimism is borne out. But I spoke to him as well about his disappointment that the UK and other NATO allies had not joined him in the war in Iran. He's been very, very critical of other countries that didn't offer more assistance, and the UK in particular. He's singled out the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, for criticism. And I said to him, if he is so pleased with how the war has gone, why did he need NATO allies to join him in this effort? And he said, well, he didn't actually need them at all, but that the help should have been there, that other countries ought to have joined him, and it was a test to see whether or not they would be prepared to get involved when he thinks America needed the assistance. So he said that the UK ought to have got involved, and he clearly thinks that by not doing so, Britain failed some kind of test there.
And Sarah, I can't let you go without asking you how you got the interview. How did it all go down? Did you pick up your mobile phone and just dial his number and he picked up?
Yeah, I know, it seems unbelievable, doesn't it? But I tried a few times in the morning and it went straight to voicemail. But on like the fifth or sixth attempt, it rang a few times and he picked it up himself with just a very gruff hello. That's all you get. And so you have to assume that that is President Trump himself on the end of the line and start asking him questions. And depending on the mood he's in, he may stay on the line for a few minutes and answer questions about all sorts of different things. He may chase you off the phone very quickly. I'm not the only journalist in Washington who has been able to get him on the phone, and it does seem to be his preferred way of communicating at the moment, of getting his message about how he feels about the war in Iran, particularly out to the public via these phone calls with journalists. The thing he most wanted to talk about, though, I have to say, was the royal visit that's coming up next week. King Charles and Queen Camilla are going to be visiting Washington. He's going to be hosting them at the White House. And he's obviously very, very excited about that prospect. He was very happy to talk about the royal visit at length. And he said he does think it might go some way to repairing US-UK relations, not least because he's so keen on the King. He said he's a fantastic man, a great man, a brave man, that it's going to be a very positive visit, and asked if it might help with the special relationship. He said absolutely yes.
Sarah, fantastic stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Sarah Smith, our North America editor. Well, the US president says he's ordered the American Navy to shoot and kill any boat laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz, insisting the US has total control of the waterway. In the last 24 hours, both the US and Iran have released dramatic footage showing their forces boarding ships American forces boarded a sanctioned tanker in the Indian Ocean that was reportedly carrying oil from Iran. Well, while Iran released footage of masked members of the IRGC boarding a cargo ship in the Strait of Hormuz, although analysis from BBC Verify suggests the video was filmed after Iran seized 2 ships in the strait yesterday. Well, with me to explain what we've been seeing in the last 24 hours is BBC Verify reporter Thomas Copeland. What more do we know about that footage released by the US, Thomas?
So they say this is a ship. They say it's called Majestic X. It is sanctioned by the US and they say it's stateless as well. Now, ship tracking data also identifies this vessel as being known as Phoenix, sailing under the flag of Guyana. That's the name that it has been sanctioned for links to Iran. It last broadcast its location about 550 kilometres east of Sri Lanka in the Indian Ocean, where it took an abrupt turn in the early hours of this morning. Monitoring groups have said that this ship has helped Iran export about 230 million barrels of oil since 2023. It's the 3rd tanker where we've seen footage of an interception by US forces, the Tiffany in Sri Lanka, off Sri Lanka on Tuesday, and the Iranian flag Tuska in the Gulf on Sunday. And we've also seen footage showing Iranian forces boarding 2 vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, Thomas. So what does that tell us? Well, it's highly produced footage. It looks like it's being, it's been underlaid with very dramatic music in the background. What we've done is examined the position of the sun and compared that to what we can see about the direction of the ship in ship tracking data. And what that indicates is that this footage was actually filmed up to 8 hours after the IRGC announced that it had seized these ships. The hatch that the men climbed through, for example, is already open. There's a cameraman on board. Both of the ships that are in the video have stopped sharing their locations. We don't know where they are, but Greek authorities behind one of the ships say that their captain is still in control. OK. Thomas, thank you very much. Lebanon's Prime Minister has accused Israel of war crimes after a journalist was killed in an Israeli strike in the south of Lebanon. Lebanese officials say Amal Khalil was deliberately targeted by Israel while seeking shelter in a building in the village of Al-Tairi after an earlier strike hit her vehicle in front of them. Well, officials said rescue teams were also blocked from reaching the scene. The Prime Minister says Lebanon will pursue international forums. The Israeli military says the incident is under review. Well, thousands of people attended Amal's funeral. Our Middle East correspondent Hugo Bachega was there.
This is the funeral procession for Amal Khalil, another Lebanese journalist who's been killed by Israel in this conflict. It is a huge procession as we go through the narrow streets of this village. Thousands of people have come here, and it really gives us an idea of how beloved she was in this country. The crowds are now walking through the streets of her village as her casket is now being carried to the cemetery, wrapped in the Lebanese flag, and there's also a blue helmet and a blue flak jacket with the word press written on it.
Well, we've spoken a lot over the last 8 weeks or so about the economic impact the war has had around the world, from the price of fuel to food to the transportation of goods. But today, there's been a fresh warning from the United Nations, who say tens of millions could be pulled into poverty as a result of increased energy prices and fertiliser shortages. The head of the UN's development programme has been speaking to Newsday on the BBC World Service.
Even if the war would stop tomorrow, this is pushing at least 32 million people back into poverty. Back into poverty because very often these were people living in countries that were actually lifted out of poverty over the last decades.
Well, let's bring in our North America business correspondent, Michelle Fleury. Michelle, great to see you. Talk us through some of the economic impacts already being seen around the world.
Yeah, I mean, Alexander de Croo is sort of picking up on something we've already heard warnings for, at least when it comes to food, where you've got warnings of potentially 45 million people being thrown into acute hunger because of those fertiliser issues that he referred to. I mean, I think around the world, we've seen different impacts. So, for example, if you start in the Middle East, Mariam, there are obviously economies that were once thriving are sort of struggling. And you've got rumours that the UAE, for example, may rely on a swap line. In other words, towards getting dollars from the United States, potentially. So it kind of speaks to the impact of the war. But then you look at countries like Asia, a lot of sort of the recipients, if you like, of the oil that gets shipped through that crucial shipping lane, the Strait of Hormuz. And there they are struggling. So Pakistan has gone to a 4-day work week. I was speaking to the finance minister last week in Washington at the IMF, and he was saying, look, in the short term, we can get through this, but the longer this carries on, the sort of recovery that our economy had been making, all of that comes into question. So it kind of speaks to the scale that many bystanders, in other words, people not directly involved in the conflict, are experiencing. And in fact, the conversation last week in Washington was how much the burden would fall on sub-Saharan countries, perhaps the hardest. In Europe, where you are, of course, there is lots of talk about jet fuel and what's going to happen there just ahead of the summer travel season. You've also got, obviously, the impact on inflation, leading to that kind of worrying spectre for central bankers of stagflation, which is when you get kind of rising inflation but also slower growth. And that will challenge central bankers probably for the next 6 months to 12 months, even if the conflict were to end immediately. So the ripple effects of this really being felt around the world, but in different ways.
Michelle, thank you. Let's end today where much of the week started, in Pakistan, because for the last 5 days, parts of the capital have been at a complete standstill, on standby for any potential talks between the US and Iran. We were told on Tuesday that no talks would take place in the immediate future and the ceasefire would be extended indefinitely. But the diplomatic back-channeling facilitated by Pakistan appears to be ongoing. Let's get the view now from our Pakistan correspondent, Caroline Davies, who's in Islamabad. And Caroline, no talk scheduled, but back-channel discussions, we believe, are ongoing.
Yes, that's certainly the indications that we're seeing, that Pakistan is still playing that same role that it has done for weeks, being this back channel between the US and Iran. Some of the other sort of indications that we've seen are officials from the US embassy here in Pakistan met Pakistan's interior minister. But the issue here, of course, is that Pakistan is trying to bridge what feels like an ever-increasing gap between these two countries. And Pakistan has to continue to be able to walk this tightrope, being trusted by both sides. And at the same time, the longer this conflict continues, the more we see that the language is escalating, actions are escalating, and there's a real risk of miscalculation.
And what's the impact been on Islamabad to be prepared in this way for talks, to hold the talks, then be prepared for more talks and waiting for talks that never happened? What's the impact of all that been?
Yes, I mean, we're all sitting in a sort of holding pattern at the moment, and the city is still partially shut down. Some of the roads have started to ease a bit, but we're seeing the real impact of the city being closed in this way. Heavy goods vehicles have not been allowed into the city. We know that that's been causing issues in trying to get petrol into the city. Some of that has started easing. They've allowed some of those vehicles in. The same issue as well for fresh dairy, fresh fruit, fresh vegetables. A union rep told us earlier today that some vegetables and fruit are going rotting at the edges of the city because they're not able to get them in here. Meanwhile, some of the prices, we've been told from people, have started to creep upwards because of that issue. Other issues as well with the courts. There's some courts inside the diplomatic area that lawyers have said that they haven't been able to access, and so their cases have been suspended. The big question is how long Islamabad can kind of stay in this suspended state of readiness at the same time as the US and Iran are trying to almost sort of count down the clock and see which side blinks first. But Islamabad can't stay in this suspended state of readiness. And the problem, I think, with that is that a lot of people, while you don't know what's going on behind the scenes diplomatically, have looked to see what is happening in Islamabad. And so the worry is that if you start taking on those signs that say Islamabad talks that are projected all the way around the city, does that suggest that diplomacy is starting to lose momentum? That is a big question. So here we're stuck in this holding pattern, but we know that this can't continue forever.
Caroline, thank you for that. Well, whether you're joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, radio or TV, thank you so much for your time. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the Iran War Today.